With that, I want to introduce Caitlin and thank her for participating and talking about the subject today is the state's roles in regulation.
Dennis, thank you. That was such a kind introduction. Wow, you and I go way back. And it's funny because I'm pretty partisan to my native state of Wyoming, where I moved back from the New York area 3 years ago. But I will say Dennis has been all along one of the people who has been helping Wyoming. And so there are a couple of states where I have been willing to roll up sleeves and help the state efforts on the ground, and South Carolina is at the top of that list because of the early support way back in 2018 when the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition work got started. And I just put out a call on Twitter. I think I had probably 5,000 followers or something at that point in time, and put out the call on Twitter for help from the industry. And Dennis, you were there. So I want to support what you're doing in South Carolina and help. And in fact, actually, you've been really great all along in getting some of the bills in front of your legislators and doing the grassroots work. And that's the topic of my remarks today, which is how can a state have an impact? And for those of you who are familiar with the way the legal structure works in the United States, we're a republic of 50 states. That's why they call us the United States. And there's a lot that happens at the federal level, but actually the primary governmental unit in the United States is the states. And there are, of course, 50 of those. Vis-a-vis the digital asset industry, the roles are actually pretty clear. The states define commercial law, and South Carolina was one of the first states, I believe, to enact the commercial law status of digital assets, to clarify that. And that is so important because it's the foundational building block for everything else. If you can't get clear legal title to a digital asset, then a traditional corporation or certainly a traditional financial institution can't participate. They have to be able to get clear legal title. They have to know what the status is under property and commercial law. And that's the purview of the states. So that is the most important building block. But then the next piece is lots of folks talk in this industry about the SEC and like to throw shade at the SEC these days. The securities laws are done federally. So the states have our hands tied, one hand tied behind our back on securities laws because the Supreme Court ruled with the Howey test, the Howey decision, which created the Howey test on what is a security that so many of us in the industry have been living with for years. That is federal. So there are certain things that the states do at in the securities area, but it's really mostly dictated by Washington, D.C., by the SEC. With regard to financial services like banking, though, the states have a critical role. The only entities that can charter banks in the United States are the 50 states or the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency in Washington, D.C. It's not the FDIC or the Federal Reserve. It's the OCC or the 50 states. They're the chartering authorities. And so that's another place where the states can really play. And I know South Carolina has looked at Wyoming Special Purpose Depository Institution charter. I'll come back and talk about that in a moment because part of the issues that we're facing as an industry with the indecision in Washington, D.C. can be solved by state action. And I would love to see South Carolina join Wyoming and create the Special Purpose Depository Institution Charter. So we've talked about property and commercial law being the purview of the states, the SEC having jurisdiction over securities laws. Banking is both federal and state. The last piece to talk about is commodities. The commodity futures are regulated federally, but there actually is no regulator for spot commodities. And so Bitcoin clearly is a commodity. That's now pretty well settled. I say pretty well because it's been more guidance than put in statute. And then Ethereum, there is some question about that, but I think it's the puck has gone towards Ethereum being a commodity as well. Definitely more risk on that decision, though, because that's not final either. And then what that all means is that there's a huge jumbled mess in Washington, D.C. over really a fight between the SEC and the CFTC over whether digital assets are securities or not, and if so, who's got jurisdiction. So there will be, I think, a grand deal that is done in Congress probably in the next in the second half of the first Biden administration term that will clarify some of these big questions that are causing a lot of us in the industry angst. And so what can the states do on that? A lot of it is literally doing what you're doing right now. Congratulations on getting together for this event. Wyoming has our event. We just had the 5th one of our event. So may we be able to continue with the momentum and may you be able to build the momentum to have, again, more and more of these events locally. And then the Texas one is coming up as well. These are really the 3 most active states in the state area right now. But I saved the best for last, which is the money transmitter laws. Some of you are probably registered as money transmitters. So let me talk about the impact of that. And here's the big picture, aha. A lot has happened in the last week and a half that I'm going to tie together some very interesting things and bring it back to money transmitters. There isn't a really good fit for registration to make a digital asset business legal from a financial services regulatory perspective. It has defaulted to state money transmitters. That is the vast majority of registrations of businesses in our industry. Everybody has to, let me just make sure that it's not confused with FinCEN registration. FinCEN is federal. That is the money transmitter and Office of Foreign Assets Control, essentially sanctions compliance. Every business in the digital asset industry has to register with FinCEN if they're moving value. And there's an interesting question about DAOs, but for right now, let's leave it to the businesses that are operating in this industry. They register as a money transmitter with FinCEN. Now, FinCEN is not actually a financial services regulator, but they do have the ability to come in and audit. They don't do that very much. They don't have a huge staff. But I want to distinguish between the FinCEN registration as a money services business and state money transmitters, because that's where something really interesting is taking place. The state money transmitter laws, like I said, are kind of putting a square peg through a round hole because they don't quite fit. But what's interesting is that this is turning out to be the regulatory advantage for this industry, is to go ahead and register at the state level, which does mean registering with 49 of the 50 states. Montana doesn't have a money transmission law, but all other 49 states do. And that makes it really difficult for the businesses to operate because you have, in theory, 49 different regulators that might come in and audit you. But here's the really interesting setup. I tweeted out over the last couple of days some very interesting puzzle pieces that are coming together, which is that you're seeing now, with the announcements of the last really week and a half, a huge increase in activity related to the Lightning Network, which is a second layer protocol on top of Bitcoin. And Square, now known as Block, which operates Cash App, is registered as a state licensed money transmitter. Now, what they're doing is increasing the activity on the Lightning Network that is literally clearing payments outside of the traditional financial system. Being somebody who started a bank, one thing I've learned is that every single payment that happens in the United States goes through the Federal Reserve. I've said this for years. This is one of the things we have to be careful of as an industry with stablecoins, because the Federal Reserve ultimately does have the purview to shut stablecoins down. They have not. But the reason that they have that is every single payment in the United States ultimately clears through the Fed. So these state licensed fintechs like Square, like Stripe, for example, they have these money transmission licenses at the state level. And now, all of a sudden, they have the ability to clear payments not using a bank. It used to be that the only way you can clear payments was to go through a bank. So what you had is a structure where the fintechs had the really efficient and great customer experiences, low cost, fast transactions, but they all had to partner with a bank on the back end. And then what happened mechanically is every transaction that went through, say, the ACH payment system ended up being sent in what's called a NACHA file by their bank to the Fed. Okay, so the Fed literally sees every payment that goes through the US dollar, through NACHA files in the ACH payment system and through FedWire, respectively, which goes directly to the Fed. But here's the aha. As of the last really week and a half, this big increase in Lightning development is being done through these state licensed money transmitters. And I got to thinking, because I've had a lot of conversations with folks in the regulatory area in the last couple of, well, last few years, but especially the last couple of weeks. The digital asset industry has a way now to clear payments at scale, not requiring the banking system, ergo not using a back-end bank to clear payments, ergo not, those payments don't touch the Fed anymore. So it's a very interesting conundrum for the regulators. And I was spitballing with a very senior, recently retired financial services official, and I laid this out for him, and he said, well, the federal regulators will figure out a way to ban this. And I said, wait a minute, all of these money transmitters are licensed at the state level, and state money transmission laws do not require the state money transmitters to clear their payments through a bank. And the reason that they don't require that is because the money transmitter statutes were written 20, 30 years ago before anybody had any idea there might be payment rails where we could clear internet native money outside of the banking system. So then his response was, well, we'll work with the states to change those laws. And my response, having worked with the states to change laws, is good luck with that, getting all 50 states to change their money transmission statutes to require that payments go through the banking system. So here's the punchline of what I just went through. I realized that was maybe a little bit in the weeds, but the punchline is that the states actually are in control of this, because these internet native payment rails now exist. Up until recently, they haven't existed at scale. Now they're being scaled. The Lightning Network has roughly the same capacity as Visa, simply because there's an infinite amount of velocity that can go through a Lightning payment channel, and it doesn't need to go through the traditional banking system's payment rails. So now this poses a very interesting dilemma, and you can see where I'm going. There's kind of a battle line drawn between the states and the feds. The states don't have to change their money transmission laws to crack down on this, and it's not going to be easy for the feds to crack down on this. And it raises some interesting questions as to whether the banking system will end up partnering with the states to figure out how to keep this all within the banking system for the US dollar. And I'll just close by adding one thing I observed yesterday in a tweet. It came out in the Twitter lawsuit between Twitter and Elon Musk that Elon Musk is viewing Twitter as a payments platform. And I tweeted out a really interesting article back in May when the Twitter conversation got started, the big drama over, is Elon going to buy Twitter, and all the brouhaha. Everybody was focused on the wrong spot. Everybody was focused on whether this was a free speech play. And there was this article by John Tamney in Real Clear Markets who said, no, this is a payments play. And guess what? It came out in the litigation yesterday that all the discovery that was publicly available, that Elon is looking at Twitter as a payments platform. So now you start to see some very interesting puzzle pieces put together here. This industry has the ability at scale to have self-clearing payments that don't go through the banking system, and it's all done legally through the state licensed money transmitter regime. So I think the next couple of years are going to be fascinating, because as the Washington, D.C. And banking industry lobbies start to realize what's happening, The real question is, how fast can Elon and Jack, who of course are working together, right? Jack Dorsey, founder of Twitter and Square, and then Elon now buying Twitter. Jack's on the Twitter board. If these two work together to build network effects very fast, doing all of this legally through the state licensed money transmitter regime, that poses a really interesting challenge to the banking industry. And I think grab the popcorn, because the states, I think, are in charge of this whole dynamic, and what they're doing is legal. So let me close by thanking you again. I threw out some really interesting, hopefully, conversation points, and I know, Dennis, you wanted to open it up for questions. So I'll pause there and see if anyone has any questions.
My pleasure, absolutely. And just one point, I rarely, if ever, have the opportunity to clarify anything Caitlin Long says. But I need just for correction, we have not yet passed the UCC, Wyoming UCC laws. But we were the first state to file an omnibus bill, that included all of them. And, it is on our legislative agenda this year to resubmit it, and possibly as part of an energy generating bill to attract the industry to South Carolina. So I'll open it up for questions. David?
Great, thank you. Caitlin, I just want to say thank you for doing this. Your work has been very influential on me, possibly more so than any other person in the Bitcoin space. But where we appear to deviate is on the viability of Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. And specifically, we now have Bitcoin-backed stablecoins that can take the form of over-collateralized commodity-style credit with no rehypothecation, cryptographic on-chain auditability of liabilities and assets, and a track record of maintaining stability. And so in my opinion, this world of commodity-style Bitcoin-backed stablecoins that don't suck out collateral or liquidity from the repo market creates this really beautiful synergy between dollar liabilities and Bitcoin collateral. And it seems so aligned with everything that I've heard you say. And I'm just curious, maybe why it's not something that you speak about more.
Well, because the algorithmic type stablecoins absolutely can exist. This is small d, small f DeFi, right? There's no intermediary involved. And frankly, most of where the regulatory efforts are focused is on places where there are intermediaries involved. And that's why I'm working on starting a bank, because frankly, I think the US dollar on-off ramps into and out of our industry are really critical, and we don't have very many of those. But that said, the DeFi piece is so small, the regulators have pretty much left it alone. So you just don't hear me talking about it very much. That doesn't mean I don't support it, not at all. In fact, I think there will be more and more of that. There are a lot of people working on decentralized central limit order books, those kinds of things, to create the decentralized exchanges. And then, of course, the algorithmic stablecoins. They have not proven to be as stable as the fiat-backed stablecoins, but these are experiments, and we're really early. I do support the experimentation, absolutely, and so I do think that they will be becoming. You'll see more refinements. I saw just this morning MakerDAO announced that the community voted to invest in U.S. Treasury, so they're starting to kind of become less of an algorithmic stablecoin and more at least hybrid fiat-backed. But also where I think your question is going is relating to my comments about leverage. I always hat tip Trace Mayer for using the phrase apex predator. Bitcoin is the apex predator of finance. And the reason is because nobody's ever going to make any more of it. And if anybody does go fractional, they do end up leveraging themselves. They do end up rehypothecating. We saw a number of failures in May, June in this industry of companies that rolled the dice and played that game, and there was no visibility into the counterparty risk into those entities. And so when they failed very fast. But it just goes to show you that if you're going to roll the dice and lever up your Bitcoin, you may get away with it in the short term, but at the end of the day, Bitcoin is the apex predator. Nobody's making any more of the real on-chain stuff. I do lament that there are more IOUs to Bitcoin. We know that. Than there are real on-chain Bitcoins. I think we're at 19.2 million outstanding right now. I don't know how many additional IOUs there are to that, but we knew in the case of the BlockFis and Celsiuses and Voyagers and Three Arrows of the world that there were more IOUs to Bitcoin than there were actual Bitcoin, because they wouldn't have gone bust if there weren't. So that's Exhibit A, that there have been so-called paper Bitcoins that have been issued out there. And unfortunately, there's not an easy way to stop that. But the markets tend to work. And I think at some point there's going to be a time when Bitcoin goes no offer, and anyone who is leveraged and needs to cover their implicit short, anytime you leverage something, it's an implicit short, then effectively what'll happen is that those companies or those individuals who have rolled the dice with that have unfortunately a hard lesson to learn. But yeah, good question. Thank you.
Do we have time for one more short question? Paul?
Hi, thank you for speaking with us. Going back to your comment about the Fed might not have any leverage on the states, just a little bit of my knowledge in the past, like driving age to 17 or drinking age to 21, where the Fed will withhold money from the states if they don't comply.
Great point.
Can they do something like that?
Well, they can. So this is where the game theory starts to play out, right? And I'm not sure from my conversations with folks in DC that just how keyed in they are to this yet. That what's going on with Lightning Network really is, for the first time, a scalable payment system that allows licensed financial institutions to legally clear payments on payment rails that don't touch the banking system. So what I laid out for you today is that the state money transmitter statutes don't preclude that, which is why it's legal. However, your point is well taken. There may be they may come in from the side, right, from a flanking move, and say to the states, you got to shut this down, and do it a different way. I remember back when I was in college, I actually was part of a group that was lobbying against the state of Wyoming to raise the drinking age to 21, because I happened to be right at that age cliff. And I knew what was going to happen. It was just going to basically make everybody, drink underground as opposed to drinking in the bars. And at least when they're in the bars, they're with people. But Wyoming was the second to the last state to enact the drinking age, and it was precisely because of what you alluded to. They didn't want to. South Dakota, I think, was the last state. They didn't want to enact that, but the feds threatened to withhold highway funds. So there are ways. That's why I say grab the popcorn. I'm not saying this is over yet, but there are ways that the feds have to exert pressure on the states. But it's going to be fun because the states have a real interest in maintaining their primacy here. And right now they are in the lead. And there's a lot of money coming into all 50 states through their financial services regulators, through the money transmission registration regimes. And I've never thought money transmission registration was the right fit for crypto. But what it's going to mean is that when Congress finally does do the big omnibus crypto regulation bill, Senator Lummis from Wyoming, along with Senator Gillibrand from New York, have a bipartisan one. And I think that's one to watch. There's a group in the House that's putting one together as well. They're going to have to maintain the state primacy in some of these areas. Otherwise, they won't get enough legislators in Congress to agree. So right now, there's pretty much zero chance, from what I understand, that anything will happen before the midterms in Congress, but keep your eye on it, because there's going to be quite it's almost going to be like Dodd-Frank again, I think, for those of you who were in the financial services industry. That was the major reform bill that happened after the financial crisis, and it took a couple years to negotiate it, and we're going to have something, I think, similar, and it's going to have an impact. It's going to change the dynamic between the states and the feds, but the states have a lot of power here because they have the ability to, they're in the driver's seat right now, and it's the feds that have to play catch up. Very good question.
Great. Caitlin, thank you so much. A perfect segue into our next session, we'll be hosting Representative Nancy Mace. comments on federal legislation and all the things that are in place. And I just want to remind you, that one of the reasons that I got interested in this was because Wyoming had 550,000 citizens. We have 5.5 million. I'm thinking, okay, well, they're way ahead as far as legislation is concerned and regulating this industry. So start your business in Wyoming, and then let's scale it 10 times in South Carolina. And I want to just as one final reminder. The beach is only 3.5 hours direct flight and cab to one of the most beautiful beaches on the East Coast. Okay, so all it is a simple trip, and my goal is to be Wyoming's beach and Wyoming's deep water port.
Love it.
Great.
Sounds great.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for having
much.
me. Appreciate it.
Great.